Today is deadline day, and the New York Mets have already added a lot to this team. They've built the Super Bowl pen. Are they done? What's left to do? We'll talk about it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. Go to 5hourenergy.com today and use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. Only valid through September 30th. Order transfusion-flavored 5-hour energy shots today. So the New York Mets had a very busy day on trade deadline eve. First, as their game against the Padres is beginning, they pick up Tyler Rogers in a trade with the Giants. Then, a couple of hours later, after watching the Phillies land their man in Duran from the Twins, the Mets got a closer of their own, picking up Ryan Helsley. Now, I did rapid reaction shows to both of those trades. This is my third podcast recording of the day, sort of, although I'm actually recording this well past 2 o'clock in the morning, as I've been catching up on work with Just Baseball and just waiting to see if David Stearns had another move in store for the Mets that I'll have to talk about. But nothing else as of now, as of this time of recording. In the next segment, I'll talk about what else was done across the market, but I wanted to take a second now to zoom out and to look at what the Mets have done so far at this trade deadline, because they have been uber aggressive. No other team has added 3 back-end arms to the bullpen. The Mets have done exactly that. They have picked up Gregory Soto, Tyler Rogers, and now Ryan Helsley. And to get those 3 arms in their bullpen, all rentals, the New York Mets gave up a total of, 6 pitchers and 2 position players, 8 players in total going out in 3 separate trades to get these arms. First, it was Wellington Aracena and Cameron Foster for Gregory Soto. Then Jose Budo, Drew Gilbert, and Blade Tidwell for Rogers. And then for Helsley, Jesus Baez, Nate Dome, and Frank Elisol. But let's go through what really was given up altogether. If you look at this farm system, how much have the Mets taken a hit with picking up these rental relievers? Elisol was a 19th round pick in last year's draft. I can tell you all about how well he was pitched this season, but that is a developmental win as an organization to turn a 19th round pick and get him to a point where you can trade him for something of value. So I don't look at that as something the Mets have lost in this trade. It is a win that they were able to turn him into something. Cameron Foster was a 14th round pick back in 2022, a 26-year-old reliever. Same thing. Developmental win. You can develop more Elisalt. You can develop more Fosters. There is no sweat in trading those guys. Wellington Aracena might hurt in a couple years. You could say he was the Mets' best pitcher in Port St. Lucie, a guy that has a high upside. But you signed him for tens of thousands of dollars a couple years ago. And you can develop another guy like that, and he is a pitching prospect all the way down in low A when you are trying to win right now. Nate Dome, or Dom, was a 3rd-round pick for the Mets last year. You can say maybe he was their top arm in high A. But if I look at the top pitching prospects in the Mets system right now, and I took a second to try to rank them, here's where I would have the Mets' current prospects and then the guys that they just traded. Nolan McLean, their number 1 pitching prospect, then Jonah Tong, then Brandon Sproat. You could put those 3 in any order. I think Jonathan Santucci is probably their 4th best pitching prospect. He was their 2nd-round pick last year, had a tough start in high A, but then really clicked into gear and has been outstanding ever since. Now he's up in double A. Jack Wenninger has been a great success story for the Mets. He is thriving as a starting pitcher in double A. Zach Thornton is another guy who's thriving. Had a great start to the season in high A. He's up in double A, continues to pitch extremely well. I think right there, that is the top 6 starting pitching prospects in the Mets system right now. I said all those names before Blade did well. I think he probably would have been 7th. I think Aracena might have been 8th. And if you really wanted to say that Dome would have been 9th, I think you can go there. But the point is, you have other prospects that are more valuable than the ones that you gave up. And the next wave that's behind the 3 that you just traded, when it comes to those prospects of significance, your ability to develop more guys. You just had a whole new draft class. There's going to be another international signing period. You can make up for the loss of those guys very easily in your farm system. So I don't think the Mets have given up an arm that you are just devastated to have lost to make these 3 trades. Then we talk about the position players. Drew Gilbert, if you look at where he was at in the Mets system, you could tell he was a top 10 prospect or a top 20 prospect or whatever you want to call it, but he's not going to be, or he was not going to be, the center fielder of the future for the New York Mets. That's Carson Bench, who continues to thrive in AA, might end up in AAA by the end of this season. Jet Williams, more likely to be in the infield than the outfield, but he could play center field. Nick Morabito and AJ Ewing, I think, are better long-term fits to be a center fielder because their defense load better, they're a little more athletic, they're quicker. Drew Gilbert doesn't hit lefties. He is above average defensively in the corners, but the jury's still out if he can be a big league regular in center field who's above average defensively. And while he has some pop, it took a long time for him to thrive in AAA. Now, he has been great lately, but I think that Drew Gilbert was, of the outfield prospects, the one the Mets were obviously most willing to trade over a Morabito or a Ewing, and certainly over Bench. So, again, that's a guy that you were sort of going to this deadline probably expecting to trade. And then there's Jesus Baez, who could be the guy that turns into a star from this trade, a guy that has a lot of potential, but a high A infielder. And if you read Keith Law's breakdown of the trade for The Athletic, he eviscerated Baez. Said he showed up to camp out of shape. The guy was coming off a torn meniscus. So I don't know if I really fault him for that. So he doesn't play hard on either side of the ball. And that's just Keith Law's perspective. Others really value Baez, but he's a polarizing prospect who's 20. And you still have Jet Williams. You still have Jacob Reimer, 2 guys who are clearly more valuable when it comes to their infield prospects, both of them on our top 100 at Just Baseball. And you hang on to Ryan Clifford as well. So when you look at it from that lens, yes, Baez is a guy that had a lot of value in the system, but you can overcome the loss of a Jesus Baez in this system. And I said all this without even mentioning Jose Budo, who is a big league arm, and I think he's going to have a lot of success over there with the Giants. I could see them shortening him up, I could see them shortening him up. He already has been shortened up. I could see them next year lengthening him out to be a starting pitcher. And I would not be surprised at all, as I said on one of the shows, that if Jose Budo ends up making 25 starts for the Giants next year and pitches to a sub-4 ERA. I think that is potentially a realistic outcome because I think Budo is a good pitcher. But if you think about the Mets this season, with all the additions they've made, Jose Budo might not even made a playoff bullpen, and he could have been a roster casualty at some point because you're trying to fit so many guys onto this roster. So Budo, a guy that pitched terrible in the playoffs last year, was not counted on by the Mets brass to be an impact arm come October. So you sell. And yes, I think Budo could have contributed good innings for the Mets for years to come. He was a good arm for them this year. But he's not Ryan Helsley. He's not Tyler Rogers. And you just add those guys into this bullpen, making this unit significantly better. So if you look back at what the Mets have done over the past week so far, and yes, they gave up a lot of players to make these deals, but they still have Jet Williams and Carson Bench. They still have all 3 of their top pitching prospects. They still have Jacob Reimer, and they still have Ryan Clifford. The guys that you don't want to trade, that's probably your top 7 prospects. And I throw AJ Ewing into that grouping as well. Your top 8 prospects right now, you haven't touched. And I'd have to do some more real digging and thinking about it, but I'd probably put a Santucci and maybe a Weninger at the back end of that top 10, maybe a Morabito. So, I mean, depending on who you talk to, the Mets might not have given up a single prospect of their top 10. I'm sure internally, from what they view of their prospects, they probably haven't given up one of their top 10 guys to land 3 top-end, high-leverage relievers to give this current New York Mets team a much better shot to get to the playoffs and win this division and to be a real threat to win it all once they get there. So up to this point, I think David Stearns has done an incredible job addressing their biggest need at this deadline, which was figuring out their bullpen. Sure, they did not get the closer with control like the Phillies did, so they didn't improve their chances in 2026 as well as 2025, but they didn't give up a prospect that hurts the way that the Phillies did with their catching prospect Tait, who top 60 for us at Just Baseball, and Mick Abel, who is ready to contribute to a big league starting rotation tomorrow and probably will with the Twins. So you look at it from that lens. Yes, the Mets are shopping for rent-the relievers, but they have kept everything in their farm system that they wanted to continue to be a sustainable winner for next year and beyond. And you know what? Sure, these guys are all rentals, but guess what? You can sign any and all of them in the offseason as well. Control for relievers is not as important as control for a starting pitcher or control for a bat. And I think that's where David Stearns has identified a little bit of a market inefficiency here where, yes, you have to give up a decent amount for these rental relievers, but you're not giving up the prospects that really would hurt to give up for a reliever. Those prospects would have to be put on the table if you got a closer with control, and that's why the Mets have not shopped in that market. But where will they shop next? What's still available to trade for on deadline day? I'm going to go through everything else that's been happening on the market here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. It's time to fuel up and turn it up. With 5-Hour Energy Transfusion, it brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you just need that extra energy boost to stay sharp and energized. I know for myself lately, with all this deadline news, I've been dragging at times in the middle of my workday, and I've been lucky to have a 5-Hour Energy to give me that boost of energy that I needed. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order. It cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. Really appreciate all of you. Helped us get to the last goal of 14,000 by the deadline. So I appreciate all of you for getting that done for us. Now, let's talk about the rest of the trade market. We've already mentioned some of the big trades, the Mets landing Rogers and Helsley, the Phillies landed Duran, other deals that happened on deadline eve. You got Caleb Ferguson, Mike Soroka, Rafael Montero, Steven Matz, Ramon Arias, Andrew Kittredge. Those are some of the other names that moved around the league. No one of great significance. Zach Littell, we talked about a little bit on yesterday's show, the first show of the day, that is, the one that went up at 6 o'clock in the morning, not all the trade deadline reaction shows. But we talked about Littell as one of the arms the Rays had to shop. He goes to the Reds, a back-end starting pitcher, has had really good numbers this season. Then you had the big trade that happened late at night. The Seattle Mariners got their guy. Eugenio Suarez was traded to the Mariners. Now, the Mariners got off his salary a couple years ago because they wanted to remove strikeouts from their lineup. And now here they are, and not even 2 full years later, and they are traded to reacquire him, which is a wild turn of events. The big piece was Tyler Locklear, a rookie first baseman who has some promise, and then a couple of pitching prospects, but not the return that everybody was expecting, not a crazy deal with multiple top 100 prospects or anything like that. Really kind of a surprising return for Suarez, considering all the buzz that was out there about him on the market. Clearly, the Diamondbacks took what they felt like was the best package for them, but I don't think that bodes pretty well for the White Sox trying to get some incredible haul for Luis Robert. I don't believe that the market right now for bats is anywhere near what the market might be for those top end relievers. So you might be able to trade even less to pick up Luis Robert unless there turns into a bidding war where maybe the Phillies get in on it and they are very aggressive trying to add Robert, and it turns into those two teams going at it, you might end up having to pay more to get Robert than you'd want. And maybe that means the Mets don't pull off the trade. But I think they're sitting in a pretty good place when it comes to leverage to get Robert when you consider what the package was for Suarez and the fact that you've already addressed your most important needs. So it's sort of a luxury ad. If you were to pick up Robert, I think the Mets are in a good spot there. Now, other sort of reports that came out that are loosely related to the Mets. One about Mitch Keller. We've talked about it. I was not a fan. I said that the contract isn't good beyond this season. I think it's like $55.7 million for the next 3 years. And it turns out that my sort of read on his trade value might have been an accurate one because the Pirates could not find anything close to what they were asking for, and they're reportedly pulling Mitch Keller off of the trade market. Now, one story that was clearly about the Mets, Joel Sherman reported that the Astros were asking about Jeff McNeil, Brett Beatty, and Ronnie Mauricio. No mention of Mark Vientos. Now, what could the Mets get from the Astros that would be worth trading one of those three guys? I don't know if they have anything because they're not going to trade starting pitching. They're a contending team. Theoretically, you could have got a reliever because the Astros have enough arms to backfill. So, yeah, go out there and get Brian Abreu. But with what you already have done to this bullpen, just to add another arm, it does not make sense to give up any of those guys. So I can't imagine the Mets would actually move any of the three to the Astros. I think the Astros are just looking for a way to add an infielder right now, whether that is a second baseman or a third baseman. And so it makes sense they would call the Mets, but I doubt that anything gets done there. So with all of that said, that's what has happened so far. Some of the rumors, what's actually left in the market. When it comes to starting pitchers, you still have Joe Ryan and Mackenzie Gore that are the top two arms of the market if they're moved. They both have a lot of control beyond this year. I think 2 years of control for each of them after this season. So they're going to cost a lot. I don't know if the Mets are going to shop in those waters. I don't know if anybody's going to meet that asking price, but those guys are the best pitchers that could move. You have your top rentals, Dylan Cease and Merrill Kelly, as well as Zach Gallen. Those three guys are still going to be kicked around a bunch. Edward Cabrera and Sandy Alcantara are both pitchers with control from the Marlins that could get dealt. You have other rentals, Shane Bieber, Charlie Morton, Adrian Hauser. I believe Tyler Anderson's a rental, Andrew Heaney. Luis Severino has a couple of years left, obviously. Going to be tough for the Athletics to move that contract. But that is mostly, I think, what's out there when it comes to starting pitchers. I'm sure David Stearns will find a way to trade for somebody that was not on that list of names, but that is what is out there right now. Top relievers left. You still have a lot of buzz around the Athletics listing on Mason Miller. So he is an incredibly intriguing arm who throws as hard as anybody in baseball and has 4 years of control after this season. And there are some teams that would consider turning him into a starting pitcher after this season. So he's definitely a name to watch. Cade Smith, Griffin Jax are both top setup man. Cade Smith might have to be the closer now with Emmanuel Clase dealing with the gambling investigation. Griffin Jax was Duran's setup man, could be the Twins closer. We'll see if they decide to move him. David Bednar still out there. Robert Suarez, the Padres are still potentially shopping their closer because they have enough arms in their bullpen to backfill that, and they could use Suarez to maybe get something else that they need. Same way they're trying to trade Dylan Cease. They're just trying to, use the MLB pieces they have that aren't part of their future to potentially get some value, knowing that they don't necessarily have the farm system to get everything done that they'd want to. So those are guys that could get traded. Pete Fairbanks still on the board from the Rays. When you look at top bats, Steven Kwan, Jarren Duran, top outfielders with control that could move, although feels doubtful that Jarren Duran's going to get traded at this point. Kwan seems much more likely. You have Ryan O'Hearn, top first baseman potentially on the move. Luis Robert, Ramon Laureano, Cedric Mullins, some of the center fielders. Harrison Bader, another center fielder. Brandon Lau is a second baseman that could get moved. Marcelo Zuna, DH who could get moved, obviously not to the Mets. Taylor Ward, an outfielder, and then Willie Castro, utility man. Those are some of the top bats that are still on the market. So as you go through all of those names, which names stick out as fits for the New York Mets? I would say any of the rental starting pitchers, and we'll talk about them more in the next segment, makes some sense. I think Sandy Alcantara makes some sense. Again, we'll touch on those guys in the next segment. On the relief front, I don't think the Mets have to add anything. But if you were going to add and you wanted to pull off another huge swing, Mason Miller is interesting, to say the least. It would just turn the Mets into it would give them, without a doubt, the best bullpen in baseball, but they're already in that conversation. I don't think they'll go there. Top bats, Robert's still the main guy that we'll be discussing. Other center fielders could bring some intrigue. They've had interest in Brandon Lau. Willie Castro would help any team. So the Mets can still go out there and grab a bat, and they can still certainly grab some more arms. What will they do? I'll give you my final predictions here in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways and the live graphics sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description and go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, when it comes to the starting pitching market, I just can't see the Mets pulling off a Joe Ryan trade or a Mackenzie Gore trade. I think it is rather unlikely that they pull off a trade for Edward Cabrera as well, because I think the Marlins are going to ask for a package that's not far off what the Twins are asking for Ryan, and what the Nationals might ask for Gore. So I wouldn't want to pay that price for a guy that's nowhere near as proven in Cabrera. Sandy is going to get traded and potentially for a decent return. I still really wonder if they can get that return that they were expecting going into the season. I still strongly doubt it. And that's why I think Sandy is still an option for the Mets, because they might be the team that can fix him. He's had 2 good starts leading into the deadline, which is a good place to begin, but there's still more work to be done. And he would be a guy that could potentially be your ace for the next 2 seasons beyond this year, where you have gotten the absolute best out of him and you sort of turn back the clock and get him back to that version of Sandy that we saw in 2022. That was the best pitcher in baseball for that season. So I like the upside of Sandy. I'm still doubtful that they would actually pull off that move. To me, it's more likely that's one of the rentals. So Zach Allen, Merrill Kelly, Shane Bieber are the 3 names that jump out to me right now, particularly Bieber. Yes, he's coming off Tommy John surgery, but there's something about that addition that feels, to me, diamond in the rough. David Stearns trying to find some value. I could see you pulling off a trade for Shane Bieber without having to give up too much, where I think the prices for Kelly and Gallen are going to be more because they're starting pitchers that have been throwing all season. They're completely stretched out and ready to go. Bieber is, again, more of a flyer, but a flyer that comes with incredible upside. The other starting pitcher that could come to the Mets, and it would be a funny one, if they pull off a trade with the White Sox for Luis Robert, what if they got Adrian Hauser back in the deal? I know that would be an interesting trade from a Mets perspective, just considering how he couldn't stay in the rotation last year and eventually got DFA'd when the Mets picked up more arms. But this season, he's made 11 starts and he's got a 2.10 ERA and a 1.22 whip. He has been ridiculously good all season long, really, ever since he got picked up by the White Sox and started pitching for them at the end of May. I think you could do a lot worse than Hauser at this deadline as a rental starting pitcher. And if you're already giving up some things for Robert and you can throw in Adrian Hauser in the deal while he doesn't raise the ceiling for the Mets, while he's not necessarily the type of arm that can start a playoff game, I think he slides right into your rotation and you can bump Clay Holmes to the bullpen. And I think that makes your team a lot better. I really do. When it comes to the bats, it's hard to predict anybody but Luis Robert because there's been so much smoke there. But I think Harrison Bader still makes a lot of sense just because you get the great defense. And the Mets would be a better team if they just swap Bader for Tyron Taylor tomorrow. They would be. So reuniting with him, it's not going to cost too much. Those are the 2 center fielders that make the most sense. I don't know if I could see the Mets trading for any other bat. I still think that they are pretty good with what they have in store, which leads me to the final note here. What if the Mets are done making moves? Did they do enough? Well, you look at their bullpen, and we don't have to reiterate it all, but you now have 5 arms that you really trust and leverage. Diaz, Helsley, Rogers, Rayleigh, Garrett. Ryan Stanek, a guy that is very comfortable or very familiar pitching and leverage, is not having the best season. But that's 6 arms in your bullpen. Rico Garcia has been throwing the ball well. Chris Devenski has been pretty decent for the Mets. There's a world where those 2 guys are still part of this team on Friday, which would be a little bit of a shocker. because that would mean they didn't add anything else, but you never know. Paul Blackburn, ready to return to the rotation or to be a long man, also could be traded on deadline day. There's been, let's just say the Mets are shopping Blackburn. So we'll see if he gets moved. Tyler McGill could be back at some point down the stretch and could pitch out of either your rotation or your bullpen. Nolan McLean pitched on Wednesday. So he's in line with Clay Holmes. If the Mets wanted to, they could have those two guys pitch in tandem as part of a rotation for a couple of turns and eventually sort of shorten Holmes to just being a multi-inning reliever and have McLean be part of their rotation all the way down the stretch. You can do the same thing with Brandon Sproat. And I think that the Mets are factoring in one of, if not both of, McLean and Sproat into their plans down the stretch of this season, whether that is helping the rotation or whether those are the guys that become multi-inning specialists to round out this bullpen. But I think the bullpen is fine. They don't have to add anything else. I think when you have Holmes, McLean, and Sproat as all being options that could end up in that bullpen, when you still have Huascar Brazaban, who could always come back and be a multi-inning option, they send him down to, I think, sort of give him a rest, but also get him on a schedule to be that multi-inning pitcher again. So he is still an option for you that you can get more out of again in the final, let's say, 6 weeks of the season after a stint in Syracuse. And there's obviously all the other arms that have been up and down all season. So I think the Mets could be fine with their bullpen. I think the rotation is something that could be addressed and maybe should be addressed, but it just depends on the price of acquisition for these guys. And we all know about center field. So the Mets will still be active in all of those markets. My prediction at this point for what happens, I think they ultimately end up with Luis Robert. And I think they, I can't even say these are predictions because I have no idea what's going to happen. So let's, instead of say predictions, what do I want the Mets to do? I'd like them to get Luis Robert without giving up any of their young players. I don't want the Mets to trade. And I'm not talking about their prospects. I'm talking about the young guys on the big league roster. I think they should trade for Robert, and then they should either DFA Tyrone Taylor and keep all the guys up, or if they want to hang on to Tyrone Taylor, they should demote Ronnie Mauricio for the rest of the month of August and have him come up as a September call-up, let him play every single day down there. And I think he'll come back and still be able to be an impact player for the Mets down the stretch. So that's what I would do on that front. And then when it comes to the starting pitching market, I like the idea of getting Shane Bieber. I really do. Or if you get one of the Diamondbacks arms. But if the Mets were able to pull off Robert and Bieber as their final two acquisitions for deadline day, I think you have improved the ceiling of your lineup and your rotation. And you just see how things work from there. But that's what I would like to see the Mets do. Granted, they might swing for an even better trade acquisition. Maybe they get Mason Miller. Maybe they get Sandy Alcantara. You can never know what's going to happen at this trade deadline, although I think the Mets have looked at where they're at and they're happy with their team if they get nothing else. I think that's what the deadline eve did for the Mets. They found a couple deals that they liked and they didn't want to wait around to see if they could get anything better the next day. They said, you know what? This solves our bullpen. And they did that. And that type of aggression should be celebrated by Mets fans. You shouldn't be looking at the prospects and saying, oh my gosh, look at the ERA of Nate Dome and High A. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. You're trying to win now. It's about winning a World Series in 2025. And you are much closer to doing that with the trades that have been made over the past week. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Probably won't be the last of me you're seeing today. I will go live if the Mets make any other trades. If they don't make any trades, I might still go live just after the deadline to break down the league-wide news and everything that happened, or maybe we'll save it for a show tomorrow. But my assumption, again, Mets probably make another move, and when they do, you will see me later on this afternoon. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day, now for your second watch. Check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming show that covers everything in the world of sports with the local experts from each team, league experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.